From the earliest beginnings of civilization, long before cities rose and empires were born, there has been a deep and haunting idea within the human spirit that life itself could be offered to something greater. Across deserts and islands, in forests and mountains, in temples and open fields, people turned their eyes toward unseen powers and believed that blood could speak where words could not. This is the story of human sacrifice. The story of human sacrifice is as old as belief itself, stretching across continents and centuries, entwined with the fears, hopes, and imaginations of humankind. The first traces of ritual killing appear in the midst of prehistory, when ancient communities struggled to make sense of nature's violence and bounty. Death was everywhere, sudden and mysterious. Storms destroyed crops, disease swept through villages. Animals and people died with no clear reason. Early humans, desperate to find meaning in this uncertainty, imagined spirits behind every wind and shadow. To appease these spirits, they gave gifts. At first, those gifts were simple offerings of food, flowers, or crafted objects. But as the sense of divine power grew, so did the gravity of the offering. A human life, rare and precious, became the ultimate sacrifice. Archaeological discoveries from sites such as the ancient settlement of Jericho and the ruins of Mesopotamia suggest that human sacrifice was not uncommon in early organized societies. In Mesopotamia, where city life and written language first emerged, the bond between ruler and gods was sacred. The death of a king could trigger rituals meant to send servants or guards to accompany him into the next world. Graves have been found where the remains of attendants lie beside their ruler, suggesting that their deaths were deliberate, a grim expression of loyalty beyond the grave. The same pattern can be seen in ancient Egypt, where the early pharaohs were buried with retainers who were killed at the time of burial, though the practice eventually faded as symbolic substitutes replaced living ones. In the ancient Near East, sacrifice was a language of devotion, and human life was sometimes part of that vocabulary. The Canaanites, for example, are said to have offered children to their god Baal during times of extreme crisis, though much of what is known of this practice comes from their enemies, which makes it difficult to separate fact from accusation. Nevertheless, archaeological sites in the Levant reveal the charred remains of infants that suggest some truth behind the stories. The idea was that the most valuable and innocent life could draw divine mercy and avert disaster. Similar beliefs appear in many cultures, from the tribes of pre-Roman Europe to the city-states of Central America. In ancient Greece, human sacrifice appears in legend more than in daily practice, yet those legends carry deep symbolic weight. Tales such as the sacrifice of Iphigenia by her father Agamemnon before the Trojan War reveal a recurring theme of the human cost demanded by fate or by the gods. While historical Greece had largely abandoned such rituals in favor of animal offerings, the stories preserved the ancient memory of an age when divine will could demand a human life. In the myths of Crete and the cult of Dionysus, echoes of blood ritual remained, transformed into metaphors of ecstasy and renewal. The Romans, pragmatic in religion as in government, generally disapproved of human sacrifice, yet the early republic was not free from it. Historical records describe rare but solemn occasions when criminals or war captives were buried alive to appease the gods during national crises. These events were seen as archaic even by Roman standards, and by the time of the empire they had been replaced with symbolic ceremonies. The arena games, however, preserved a strange echo of sacrificial thinking. The gladiator's death became a public spectacle of blood and honor, a controlled expression of violence that satisfied both civic and spiritual impulses. Beyond the Mediterranean, on the other side of the world, human sacrifice took on even more elaborate and sacred forms. In Mesoamerica, the peoples of the Olmec, the Maya, and especially the Aztec empires believed that the universe itself depended on human blood. The sun, they believed, required nourishment to rise each day. The gods had given their lives to create the world, and humanity owed a debt that could only be paid in kind. On the high temples of Tenochtitlan, victims were laid upon stone altars and their hearts were offered to the sun. This was not done in cruelty alone, but in a cosmological vision where sacrifice maintained the balance of existence. Warriors captured in battle were honored to die for the gods. Their deaths were part of a sacred economy where blood was the currency of creation. Among the Maya, sacrifice was more varied. Sometimes it involved bloodletting rituals by nobles who cut their own flesh as offerings. In other cases, captives were killed in ceremonies connected to agriculture and the cycles of time. The famous cenote at Chichen Itza, a deep natural well, was used as a place of offering where both precious objects and human victims were cast into the water to please the rain god. Archaeologists have found the remains of men, women, and children preserved at the bottom, silent witnesses to a belief that life could bring forth rain and fertility. In South America, the Inca practiced human sacrifice in their own solemn way. High in the Andes, frozen remains of children have been discovered, placed atop mountains as offerings to the gods. These sacrifices, known as capacocha, were acts of devotion performed during great festivals or in response to calamities such as drought or the death of an emperor. The chosen children were often of great beauty or noble birth, treated with honor, given fine clothes and food, and led with ceremony to their final resting place. To the Inca, their death was not punishment, but elevation, a joining with the divine forces that govern nature. Across the oceans in the islands of Polynesia, sacrifice played a vital role in maintaining social and spiritual order. In Hawaii, the heiau temples were places where offerings to the gods, including human ones, were made to ensure victory in war or prosperity in peace. The victims were often prisoners of war, their deaths serving as both religious ritual and political message. In other island cultures, sacrifice was connected to the sea, to navigation, or to ancestral spirits, reminding everyone that life and death were threads in the same sacred fabric. In sub-Saharan Africa, human sacrifice also appeared in various forms. Among certain West African kingdoms, such as Dahomey, ritual killings accompanied royal funerals or major state ceremonies. The spirits of the dead were believed to require attendance in the afterlife, and the blood of sacrifice was thought to strengthen the connection between the living and the ancestors. In other parts of Africa, particularly among tribal communities, human sacrifice was tied to fertility rituals, war victories, or the consecration of sacred spaces. Over time, these practices often blended with or were suppressed by the spread of Islam and Christianity, yet echoes remained in oral traditions and symbolic customs. In ancient China, human sacrifice was also deeply woven into royal and ancestral worship. During the Shang dynasty, thousands of human victims were offered to gods and royal ancestors. Archaeological excavations at Anyang have revealed vast burial sites containing both humans and animals, arranged in careful patterns. These were not random killings, but structured acts of devotion, expressing a belief that the emperor's authority extended into the spiritual world. Later dynasties replaced human victims with figurines or symbolic offerings, marking a gradual shift from literal to representational sacrifice. Japan, too, once practiced forms of human offering. Early traditions mention victims buried beneath bridges or castles to appease the spirits of the land, a custom known as hitobashira, or human pillar. Over time, these grim rituals faded, replaced by offerings of objects, prayers, and festivals meant to honor the same unseen forces without the taking of life. The transformation reflected a broader human journey from literal sacrifice to symbolic devotion. In Northern Europe, the Celts and Germanic tribes were known for their sacrificial rites. The bog bodies found in places like Denmark and Ireland tell of individuals who were killed and placed in sacred wetlands. Their preservation in peat has kept their faces almost intact, as if still caught in the moment of offering. The reasons for their deaths remain debated, but many scholars believe they were sacrifices to gods of fertility, war, or the harvest. These acts were not casual killings, but carefully structured rituals meant to renew the bond between people and nature. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, certain indigenous peoples practiced forms of human sacrifice connected to the dedication of totem poles or canoes, though the practice was rare. Farther south, among the Mississippian cultures, archaeological sites suggest ceremonial violence that may have had sacrificial meaning. Meanwhile, in other parts of North America, rituals involving symbolic or voluntary sacrifice were far more common, with participants undergoing fasting, bloodletting, or vision quests to connect with the spiritual world without the loss of life. Across these many examples, a common theme emerges. Human sacrifice was not simply about cruelty or domination, it was about communication with forces beyond human reach. In a world where nature's rhythms governed survival, where crops and rain and sunlight determined fate, sacrifice was seen as a dialogue between mortal and divine. The act of giving life back to the gods was a way to sustain the cycle of creation. Every drop of blood carried meaning. Every death was a plea for balance. As civilizations grew more complex, however, moral and philosophical shifts began to challenge the idea of human sacrifice. In the Near East, emerging monotheistic faiths redefined the relationship between humanity and divinity. The Hebrew story of Abraham and Isaac, for instance, tells of a moment when the act of offering a son was replaced by the mercy of God. Whether historical or symbolic, such stories marked a turning point in spiritual thought. They declared that obedience and faith were greater offerings than blood. This shift influenced Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all of which came to reject human sacrifice as abhorrent, associating it with the sins of the past. In India, the evolution of Vedic religion into Hinduism brought a similar transformation. Early Vedic rituals sometimes included human offerings, but philosophical developments and the concept of ahimsa, or nonviolence, replaced blood with symbolic or vegetarian offerings. Sacrifice became internalized as a matter of spirit and self-discipline. Buddhism and Jainism carried that rejection even further, teaching that the truest sacrifice was compassion itself. In Greece and Rome, as rational philosophy rose, the gods became more metaphorical and less demanding of human blood. In China, the moral teachings of Confucius promoted harmony and humaneness, replacing older practices with reverence expressed through ceremony rather than death. The same transformation unfolded in Japan, where Shinto rituals evolved into peaceful offerings of rice, music, and dance. By the medieval period, human sacrifice had become rare, often confined to remote regions or practiced in secrecy. When Christian missionaries and Islamic scholars encountered such customs in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, they condemned them as barbaric, yet they also misunderstood their spiritual depth. What was seen as cruelty by outsiders was often, within the native worldview, an act of sacred necessity. Still, as global religions spread and empires expanded, the practice of human sacrifice declined, replaced by symbolic substitutes and moral codes that prize the sanctity of life. In the modern era, the idea of sacrifice has not vanished, but its form has changed. Wars, revolutions, and ideologies have demanded lives in the name of higher causes, echoing the old logic that death can purify, redeem, or sustain society. The language of sacrifice remains powerful, whether in religion, nationalism, or personal devotion. People still speak of giving their lives for faith, freedom, or love. The altar has moved from the temple to the battlefield, from the priest's hands to the hands of soldiers, martyrs, and heroes. Looking back, it is tempting to judge the ancient world by modern moral standards, to see human sacrifice only as horror. Yet to understand it fully, one must recognize that it was born from reverence as much as from fear. It arose from the human attempt to reach beyond the visible, to touch the divine, to make sense of suffering and mortality. In a world without science, ritual was the only bridge between the known and the unknown. The gift of life was the highest form of communication, a sacred language written in flesh and blood. As knowledge grew and societies changed, that language evolved. Where once blood was spilled, now incense is burned, prayers are whispered, or moments of silence are held. The meaning remains the same, a recognition that life is fragile, that forces greater than ourselves shape our existence, and that sometimes giving something precious feels like the only way to honor those forces. In every culture, the end of human sacrifice marked not just a moral advancement, but also a transformation of consciousness. Humanity learned that devotion need not destroy life to prove itself. Compassion replaced fear, and symbolism replaced death. Yet the memory of those ancient rites remains woven into myths, art, and literature, a haunting reminder of where humanity has been and what it once believed. Even today, the idea of sacrifice continues to resonate in art, religion, and collective memory. It appears in the stories of saints and heroes, in ceremonies of remembrance, and in the willingness of individuals to endure pain for others. The form has changed, but the essence endures. The human heart still seeks meaning through giving, still reaches for transcendence through offering. In the end, the history of human sacrifice is not only a story of death, but also a story of transformation. It tells of how human beings have wrestled with the mystery of existence, with the question of what must be given to sustain life, and with the longing to commune with forces beyond understanding. It begins in fear and ends, perhaps, in compassion. From the fires of ancient altars to the quiet prayers of modern temples, it traces the long journey of the human soul from terror toward mercy, from blood towards spirit. This is the legacy of human sacrifice, both dark and profound. It is a reminder that humanity's oldest rituals were not simply acts of violence, but expressions of the deepest longing to find order in a chaotic world. Through the ages, as the knife was replaced by prayer and the altar by reflection, the essence of sacrifice survived, purified by understanding. And so, while the world no longer demands human lives to please its gods, the ancient rhythm of offering still echoes within the human heart, whispering of the eternal bond between life, death, and the sacred mystery that lies beyond them both.